to the East Long Meadow Senior Center. I'm Bruce Moore from the East Long Meadow Historical Commission, and tonight is our spring program. We usually have 2 a year, and we're very honored this evening to have Mr. David Cecchi here as our speaker. He'll give you a little information about himself, but he's written a book about Riverside Park, and that'll be his topic for this evening. In the 50s, Riverside Park was a huge place for me to go on Saturday night. Everybody went to the races there to see Giacomo Giacomo, Dick Dixon, Jerry Humiston, Buddy Krebs, the whole gang there. And even if you didn't go on Saturday night, in East Long Meadow here, you could hear the warm-ups, you could hear the races, and hear them going around the track. It was just wonderful for us there. It was just a way of life. Saturday night was always race night at Riverside in the summer, so that's my memories, and I'm pleased to introduce David. Will we give him a big hand, please?
Hi, thanks for having me. I give you a little background on this book. I am involved in the Agawam Historical Association, and I put together the Images of America book for Agawam. And when I was putting that book together, there was a chapter on Riverside, and as I was putting it together, I realized there's enough information for a whole book, so I kept that aside. It's been about 10 years since that book came out, but Riverside Park was published last year, and as just experience, one thing I learned when I was researching this book is that everybody has a Riverside story. And I don't probably turn this light off. See a little better. The most common story was that they met at Riverside, or their parents met at Riverside, or their grandparents met at Riverside, or even their great-grandparents met at Riverside. I'm not sure that any institution in Western Massachusetts had such a hand in romance as Riverside Park. But to show the hold that Riverside Park had on people, I have an old razor that I got at an antique shop, and it's just a regular old razor in the box. The box is pretty beat up, but it's never been used. It still has the original blade, never been unwrapped. And I found a little note tucked inside, and the note said, "Won at Riverside roller skating rink, summer of 1938, for second best looking boy on floor." So that's the kind of impact Riverside had on people. This man won this in 1938, never used it, but he was that special to him. But as you know, there used to be a lot of amusement parks all over New England. What set Riverside apart was that it had everything. It had a roller skating rink, it had a pool, it had a dance hall, it had the biggest and best roller coasters, it had a drive-in movie theater, it had a dance hall, it had everything. Riverside Park, if you think Six Flags New England is a draw now and is a big part of Western Mass, I think Riverside Park back in the 1920s was even bigger in comparison. It was the place to go. And it all started as a picnic grove. And just north of Riverside Park on River Road in Agawam, it was a little lodge called Kalashasta. And the people who owned Kalashasta bought Riverside Grove from the Gallup family, who had been using it as a picnic grove since the 1850s. And the Smiths, when they bought it, they tried to make improvements to it. And they became very famous for the clam bakes. And this was a shot of the Riverside crew getting ready for a clam bake back in the early days. One of the popular ways to get to Riverside from Springfield was by steamboat. And this was one of the early boats. This was the Mascot. And the Mascot became famous in 1899 when President McKinley visited the area, and it took President McKinley down from Holyoke down to Springfield. This is Riverside Grove, showing the bandstand on the right and a refreshment stand. And this was one of the main attractions of Riverside at that early time, was the shade. And it was just a place to go in the summer to get away from the heat and dirtiness of the city. One of the things they advertised was that Riverside was clean and that the pine needles carpeted the ground so there was no dust. By 1900, the Mascot was not large enough, so they built the Sylvia. And probably, if anyone remembers any of the steamboats, the Sylvia is one of the steamboats that sticks in people's mind. When I first started getting interested in local history, I would hear people talk about the Sylvia in conjunction with Riverside. And up until I really did some research, it was amazing that the people that were talking about the Sylvia as if they had been on it, really, I don't think they could have, because the Sylvia stopped sailing in 1923. So they were repeating stories. Probably their parents and their grandparents would sail on the Sylvia, and it was such an important part of their summer activities that was just a story that got repeated from generation to generation. This is a picture of the Sylvia at night. And this was the old South End Bridge. And the Sylvia, the smokestack was too tall, so it actually had a hinge in it, so when it would come up to the bridge, they would fold down the smokestack and pass underneath. And Captain Smith petitioned the Coast Guard for years and years and years to raise the bridge, and it finally was raised. It was raised 15 feet, but troublemakers, little boys, and they used to like to hang out on the bridge and throw rocks and dirt down on the Sylvias and passed underneath. This is a shot of the Sylvia, and you can kind of see a seam in the smokestack. And I think that was probably where it was hinged. This was the boat landing. You can see in the early days it was nothing fancy. The boat was tied up right at the bank of the river, and you came up a dirt path to the park. And this is looking up from the river. And on the right side is the dance hall, and that's where the popular dances of the day were held. The other way to get to Riverside Park was the trolley, and this is a shot from the park looking up the top of Main Street and people coming down from the trolley. And you can see the way people are dressed to go to Riverside. They're in their weekend finest. The caption of this postcard was a table where the clam eaters fill up. And that shows how popular the clam bakes were back in the day. This was an early merry-go-round. I titled this presentation 100 Years as the Playground in the Connecticut Valley. That's based on 1912 when ownership of the park changed and the first roller coaster was built. But if you define an amusement park by an amusement such as a merry-go-round, I found references to merry-go-rounds at Riverside as far back as 1885. So Riverside really does have a long history as an amusement park. These are swings that were in the grove. In 1911, this is when Riverside Grove changed dramatically. Henry J. Perkins purchased the Grove, and he owned Henry J. Perkins Company. It was a fruit and produce wholesaler. And I like to describe Henry Perkins sort of as the Peter Pinelli of his day. He had his hands in a lot of different things. He was involved in all the trade organizations and civic organizations. He was one of the big movers and shakers in Springfield. And I could never figure out why someone like him would want to buy a picnic grove and turn it into an amusement park. And I was, last year I was giving a presentation at the Springfield Museums, and after the presentation, a woman came up to me, and she was Henry Perkins' grandson's daughter. And in that family, the stories had been told over the years, and he was a cheerleader for the Pioneer Valley. He thought this was a great place to live, a great place to have a business, and he thought that Riverside Park would be a great asset to the area, and he wanted to provide a place where people could go for amusement, and that sort of cleared that up for me. In 1912, Riverside Grove opened up as Riverside Park. This is a detail of a map. You can see the river at the top, the path to the dance hall, and Main Street at the bottom. And then just sort of in the middle to the right, the giant dip coaster, which was the first roller coaster built at Riverside. This is the main entrance coming from Main Street, and you can see the roller coaster on the right. This is another shot of the roller coaster. The Springfield Union was very concerned about Riverside Park because there were, even though the Smiths had kept very strict temperance principles at the park, they were concerned that Henry Perkins was going to turn this into a den of iniquity. So when he made the improvements and as when they opened and they saw all the things that he did, they gave him a lot of glowing reviews in the press. Another shot of the roller coaster. This was the dance hall, and William Cook ran the dance hall from early 1900s all the way up to through the 30s. And you can see that this was the earliest dance hall, and over time it grew to become one of the largest dance halls in New England. One of the other big improvements that Henry Perkins made to the park was the picnic area itself, the Grove. He put in this bridge over to the Grove area of the park. He put in new tables and pavilions, and these are some of the crowds at the park. In 1912, George Hendy from Indian Motorcycle had a picnic at Riverside Park, and he had, I think there was like 1,250 people that came. All his employees and their families came to the Grove. This is a seaplane that was part of an exhibition. This was an ad in the paper with Nels Nelson and his flying boat. This was around 1913. It was one of the first exhibitions of a seaplane in this area. So Riverside really was right on the cutting edge. They were really, whatever was new and unpopular, they were really there to promote it. The other improvement that Henry Perkins made was he extended the dock out into the river, so the Sylvia didn't have to tie up right along the bank, because I guess in times when it was dry and the river was low, that was a problem. So this eliminated that problem. Riverside had their own waltz. This is the cover for the sheet music. And in 1913, the Sylvia needed some more help, so they had the Zeta May join her on the river. And this was the back of the card. The slogan "Let's Go," that was in all their advertising, and this is a little song that I guess people were encouraged to sing on the boat as they went to Riverside. This is one of my favorite stories. I have to read you this article. This was Aggie Castillo, and she was a lion tamer who had lions at Riverside Park. And this is an article that was in the Sunday, or the Springfield Republican on August 12, 1916. And the headline is, Given Roaring Reception. Madame Castillo returns to her lions at Riverside and takes them away. Madame Aggie Castillo, daring lion trainer, was tendered a roaring reception when she returned to Riverside Park yesterday afternoon after her 10 man-eating pets. Madame Aggie left the park rather prematurely Wednesday, leaving her highly educated lions behind. Where she had gone, no one knew, and the hungry lions became a weighty problem for the park management. Finally, they were stored in a nearby barn where they were startled the natives of Agawam with loud and ferocious roars for food and for their owner. Meanwhile, Madame had boarded the train in Springfield for Boston, where she induced the management of Revere Beach to allow her to stage her show for the edification of the Boston beach patrons. After obtaining a contract, she once more returned to Riverside, said contract being carefully folded in her handbag. Manager Butterworth and others connected with the resort at once escorted her to where her quote-unquote babies were imprisoned. As she entered, Caesar, Brutus, Androcles, and all of the 10 reared up on their hind legs, opened their more or less mammoth jaws, and emitted blood-curdling roars of welcome. This seemed to please Madame. Shortly after, they were loaded carefully on trucks and brought to the city, where they were placed in cars and shipped to Boston. That in itself is entertaining enough, but when I was doing a little background research on Aggie Castillo, I came across an article from 1914, and this was in Adelaide, Australia newspaper. Her fiance, who was a wannabe lion tamer, was attacked by her lions and eaten by her lions in 1914. And I guess the show must go on. It didn't seem to really faze her, but it was just one of those stories that I couldn't get into the book, but I have to tell that story. It just is, it's just amazing. So that's Madame Aggie with her lions. So by 1914, the dance hall up on the river was not adequate enough for the crowds that were coming to Riverside. So they built this dancing pavilion down on the banks of the river. It was an open air pavilion. They had a band shell, and what they did was they had the modern dances were held out in the open air, and the more traditional dances were held up at the dance hall. So you can see the Sylvia in the background steaming up the river. In 1914, the Giggler was opened in Riverside, and that was was a sort of like a fun house. And let's see, there's an interesting little quote from the Springfield Republican in here. Let's see. The Sunday Republican declared that if one could go through the Giggler and come out with a solemn face, it will be because that person is deaf, dumb, blind, and insensitive. So, and this is a shot of the actual entrance. In 1915, the dip coaster was joined by the Greyhound. It was a larger roller coaster, and the marquee says it's New England's greatest ride, some speed kid. So, and this is the postcard of that same shot. This was the Midway in 1915, and the Mountain Torrent ride actually opened up 2 years earlier as the Panama Canal ride. And the Panama Canal ride was it was a water ride. You went inside and you got in a little boat, and there was a little canal that they actually wound its way through the building, and there were like recreations of the Panama Canal. And much like today, the public is fickle, and once the Panama Canal opened, nobody cared about the Panama Canal anymore, so they revamped the ride as the Mountain Torrent. And basically it was the same ride, it just they changed the Panama Canal interior to more like a mountain scenery, so it was more like a little rapids ride. This ride would later change to the coal mine ride, and when they took out the water, the canals, and they actually had little donkeys pulling people in carts through the ride. In 1916, the roller rink opened. Everyone remembers that it was the rollaway, but it actually opened up as the roller rink deluxe because there was another rink in Springfield called the Rollaway at that time. This is the dance hall, the open air dance hall was later enclosed. And you can see they just built it right around the band shell. And this was the dance hall that survived into later years down by the river. It was 220 feet by 110 feet. And they had all the big bands. John Philip Sousa came to Riverside. Paul Whiteman came to Riverside. Later, Tommy Dorsey came to Riverside. Harry James. This is another shot of the exterior. In 1917, Riverside Park opened up what it was originally called the Natatorium. And it was a 300-foot diameter cement pool. One of the things they really stressed was that there wasn't really an adequate place for people to go swimming. There was Watershop's Pond, but they said it really wasn't adequate and that the river was not safe, so they wanted to provide a place where people could go to swim. And they really hyped the purity of water. They said it was 98% pure and that it was filtered at a rate of 3,000 gallons a day. It's a different shot. Again. Later, within a couple of months, their advertising would say, "Come take a dip in our pool," and it became Lake Take a Dip. And that's how a lot of people remember the pool. The pool is called Lake Take a Dip. This was the Midway. Riverside Park was such a part of this area that this Ritter Wholesale Grocers had a Riverside Park brand of products, and it had the engraving of Lake Take a Dip on the label. These are some swimmers in the pool. This was Alfredo. He performed at Riverside in 1917, and one of his part of his act, the evening act, he would come out on the high wire dressed as a woman. He would come out to the middle. He would take off his robe, and he would have on sleeping garments on, and he would lay down on the wire and quote unquote go to sleep. And that was the end of the show. These are some bathing beauties from 1919. They're obviously wearing a lot more clothes than they do now. This is a panoramic shot of the pool, and you can see the roller coaster in the back and Alfredo's high wire over here on the left. And on the right side, that was the diving platform in the middle of Lake Take a Dip, and that was a giant cement structure, and that's where the water came up and out of. And it was 11 feet deep out in the middle of the pool. And later when the pool was not used and they ended up filling it in and became a parking lot, that structure, they just left it there. And that was actually there until 1999, the middle of the parking lot. And a lot of people didn't even know what it was. It was just this gigantic cement structure. That's a closer look at it. And that's it in the mid-80s. But I guess it was too much of a job to bother taking down. This was the Midway 1919, the new roller merry-go-round building in the background. This is one of the attractions, 1001 Troubles. And then there's the Mountain Torrent reworked as the coal mine. And this was the entrance / exit of the park. You can see the open air trolleys in the middle of the shot. And then in 1920, the original dip coaster was torn down, and it was replaced with this roller coaster. It was called the Lightning, which was twice the size of the original dip coaster. And the Republicans said that Riverside Park was elevated to Luna Park status once this roller coaster went in. This was a dance card from Cook's Crystal Ballroom at Riverside Park, and McAnally, he was a popular band in the area. Ted Lewis was a national recording artist. George Olson also recorded nationally. And Ferdinando, that was like a Latin style band from Connecticut. By the 20s, people were driving to Riverside more than taking Steamboat. So by the early 20s, the Sylvia was taken out of service, and full parking lot. And traffic at Riverside has always been an issue. I mean, it's an issue now with Six Flags. I found references back as far as the 1910s of quote-unquote speeders on River Road in Agawam going to Riverside. And so it seems that the more things change, the more they stay the same. This was the airplane ride at Riverside. Miss America came to Riverside, and she was part of in the ballroom. They were looking for the prettiest girl at Riverside, and they crowned her Miss Riverside. And that was a tradition that was later revived. Here's a promotional card from the 1920s in the back showing Children's Day special, 3 cents a day. In 1930, Agawam celebrated the 75th anniversary of its incorporation, and they had a huge parade that wound from Feeding Hill Center down through North Agawam and then down Main Street, and it ended up at Riverside Park. And this is the Balboni Bakery. They had their delivery trucks and wagon in the parade, and you can see the roller coaster in the background. And they had a huge pageant. It was called the Pageant of Agawam. It was this big historical production in the amphitheater at Riverside. So by the 1930s, Henry J. Perkins, he passed away in 1927, and they weren't really sure what to do, so they ended up selling the park. They went to auction. His brother purchased it. Then the stock market crashed. Things weren't really good at all in the economy. In 1932, the park only opened up on weekends and like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. and it went through a few owners, and by the mid-30s it had closed and it had kind of fallen into disrepair. So in 1937, 38, they put a drive-in theater. It was the first drive-in theater in Western Mass in the parking lot at Riverside. It was called the Riverside Park-In Theater, and this was a ticket for that. And so it's a ticket stub from the Park-In. And this is where Ed Carroll Sr. came in. He moved out from Boston to manage the theater. At the time, the theater was showing second and third run movies. It wasn't really the town of Agawam wasn't really thrilled with what it was showing. They were, not happy with it. Ed Carroll, his goal was to improve the offering at the theater. He wanted to class it up a little bit. And while he was there, he fell in love with what I call the ruins of Riverside. The hurricane in 1938 came through the previous year. The grounds of Riverside was a mess. The previous owner had sold off, a lot of the rides. It was just a real mess. But Ed Carroll saw a lot of potential there. So he ended up buying the park, and pretty miraculously, within a year for the next season, opened up the park as Riverside Park. And this was the ad that was in the paper for the grand opening, and it just showed everything that was going on. There was bands, there was fireworks, there were rides, there was Kittyland. He also had the Animal Kingdom, 12 acres, and he had 100 animals in there. He had a lot of stuff going on, and traffic was backed up from Riverside Park down Main Street all the way to the bridge in West Springfield, and all the way down River Road all the way to the bridge. So people were really clamoring. They missed Riverside, and they were happy that it was back.
What year was that?
1940, he reopened. And this is a shot from opening day, and I think it's a little funny because this woman, here she is at Riverside Park on opening day, 1940, and she just looks like she'd rather be anywhere else. But that's the Animal Kingdom display. The other thing I forgot earlier was that they had a bowling alley, and they built a state-of-the-art bowling facility. It had like a state-of-the-art lighting system. It had locker rooms. It had everything for bowling when it opened. And this shot is actually the St. John the Evangelist Parish in Agawam had been formed as a mission parish, and they were looking for a place to build a church. And they had been worshiping in the old Agawam town hall, and then that didn't work out. So the Baptist church wouldn't let them use their church, and the Congregational church decided to let them use the church. And they were there for a year or so, and then they doubled the rent. So they were trying to raise funds to build a church, and they didn't have money to spend on double the rent. So they were kind of between a rock and a hard place. Ed Carroll was a member of the parish, and he said, "You can come down to the bowling alley and use the bowling alley." So every Sunday before Mass, they would come down, and he donated curtains. So they put up curtains all around, and they held Mass in the bowling alley for a few years while they were raising money to build their own church. And they even had CC classes up in the mezzanine. In 1946, St. John built the church that's on Main Street now, and they moved into there. This is a postcard from the early 40s after Ed Carroll purchased the property. You can see right in the middle here was the bowling alley, and right next to it was the roller skating rink. At the far right, you can see the screen for the drive-in theater, and in the back, the roller coaster and the dance hall. During the war, Ed Carroll and his park engineer built this. They actually had 3 of these. They were called the Transmobiles, and there was no public transportation during the war, so they provided this bus to bring people down to the park. And these ran for a few years. They ran on propane gas. This was the rollaway, some soldiers. A patriotic review at the rollaway. This was a picnic of Steiger's employees at the Grove. Frank Maiolo and Pop Briggs. Frank Maiolo ran the rollaway from the 1940s up until he passed away in the 1960s, and Pop Briggs had managed the rollaway in the 20s and the 30s. This was a raffle ticket for a 1947 Ford V8 sedan. Car giveaways were huge at Riverside Park. I found reference back to 1920s. They were raffling off cars. This actual 1947 was won by Loretta Albano. She bought, I think, 20 tickets, and this was the last ticket she bought was the winner. She didn't have a license. She didn't know how to drive a car, but she won it. So I think that was her incentive to start. These are some shots that were given to me, and as you know, those images of America books are all in black and white. And this man provided these shots that his father had taken. These were slides that he took back in the 40s and 50s, and they were in color. And to me, it was one of the highlights of putting the book together. Seeing these images of the park in this vibrant color was just amazing. And you can see Ed Carroll. He used Superman and cartoon characters that were popular during the day, much the same way that Six Flags New England uses the Looney Tune characters now. This is another shot of the little boat ride. A little train. This was Miss Riverside. That was a tradition that Ed Carroll revived, and when they opened, they would traditionally open up on Easter Sunday, and they would have people from Forbes and Wallace and Steiger's kind of walking through the crowd, and they would kind of vote on the most stylish woman and name her Miss Riverside. And that tradition went from the 1940 up until the 1970s, and at that point it kind of died out. In 1948, the big bandy era was kind of winding down. Ed Carroll could see that there were less and less people coming out to the dance hall, and he was on top of trends. He could see things happening, and he saw that stock car racing was becoming very popular. So he tore down the dance hall and he put in a racetrack down by the river behind the roller coaster. That roller coaster is the Thunderbolt. That's still there now. When it was built, it was called the Cyclone. And when he bought that, or when he opened up the park, there was no roller coaster. He bought the tracks, the plans, and the cars from the 1939 World's Fair, and he didn't have the lumber for to build it. but he wheedled this deal with Jake Grossman of Grossman's Lumber out in Boston, and he kind of basically said, if you give me the money to build this roller coaster, if I make money, I'll pay you back, and if I don't make money, then I can't pay you back. And I guess Jake Grossman kind of, I guess he saw that there was potential there, so because he gave him the loan and the lumber, and he built the roller coaster. This was the sticker, Speedway sticker. The Bob Belize is in the driver's seat of this truck. Belize Motors had the contract, the record contract for the racetrack, because at that time, in the late 40s, early 50s, most of the tow trucks were the old hand crank trucks, and he had pretty much, it was the only power winch in the area. And Ed Carroll, there was a wreck on the speedway. He wanted it cleaned up and cleared up fast, so they got the contract, and they had the contract for many years. Frank Maiolo at the Rollaway was known for his stunts. He was a master of publicity. Here they're playing basketball and roller skates, which I just can't imagine is a good idea. But more. And Hal Lee was the organist at the Rollaway for many years. Another stunt at the Rollaway, pie eating contest out on the floor. Here's some kitchen workers at the Grove. The woman in the front is Flo Frasco, and she lent me this photograph to use in the book. And she is, let's see, she started at the Grove in 1948, and I think she might have retired last year. She's worked all those years. After 50 years, the Carroll family gave her and her husband a trip to Las Vegas for all her years of service. She is, she's a pistol. She's really a great lady, and she's got definite opinions. She says that Six Flags does not know how to put on a spread. This is the Grove staff in front of the Laugh in the Dark ride back in the early 50s. And here we are, the Midway in the early 50s, and you can see the Thunderbolt, the sign says Cyclone on it, so this had not been renamed at this point. Postcard for Kittyland. And this is another shot of Kittyland. And the Little Dipper was the little roller coaster that you saw in those color shots. And the Little Dipper was the first children's roller coaster in the East when it was built in the 1940s. This was another Miss Riverside. This is actually my mother. In the early 1950s on the Little Pony ride. Buddy Krebs. More the ride. And you can see, people really, dressed a lot differently back in the early 50s than they do now when they go to the park. This was the Midway and the giant clown head. Nearly everyone who has a memory of the giant clown head, it's not a good one. It's I think it scared more people than it made happy. This was the Carousel Cafeteria at Riverside. Another shot of the clown head. and the Midway. There's a shot of my grandfather with a broken arm that he got at the rollaway. This was Gene Bergen. He was another racer at Riverside. One of the concessions. And one of the things that I learned was that prior to probably the 1970s, that all the concessions at Riverside Park, they were all leased concessions. These people owned this one and I think the skee ball concession, and they later moved up to Mountain Park. But eventually everything was consolidated under, Riverside owned everything. This was the big Ball. More children's rides. The rollaway. More stunts. You can see in the middle, that's Frank Maiolo in the top hat, and he was known. He loved hats, and at one point he had read that when Richard Nixon was inaugurated as the vice president, he had a top hat he bought for $35, and he didn't really like top hats. He preferred Homburgs. So Frank Maiolo sent Richard Nixon a telegram offering him $50 to buy his top hat, which was declined. So Frank Maiolo just donated the $50 to a charity. But what he had planned to do with Richard Nixon's top hat was that would be the hat that he passed around to raise money when they raised money for charities. Frank Maiolo was very, very involved with raising money for different charities at the rollaway. Here he is with some children. This was one of the water rides at Riverside in the 1950s. And Jungle Cruise ride. Disneyland opened in 1955, and that was a huge inspiration for Riverside Park. As you can see, this is almost an exact replica of the Jungle Cruise ride at Disneyland. And the monorail at Riverside was the only monorail in the country outside of Disneyland when it was built. Which, when you realize that, growing up in this area and knowing that there was a monorail at Riverside, it's like, oh, big deal, there's the monorail at Riverside. It's just, part of what you grew up with. But when you learn about it, that, yeah, the only other monorail was at Disneyland. So it kind of puts, Riverside Park in a perspective. They really were a top-notch entertainment for the region. The Wild West ride. This is the celebration. Ed Carroll on the left and Susan and Frank Maiolo on the right for the 10th anniversary of operating the rollaway. This was a sports car rally in 1962 at the Speedway. You can see there's Corvettes and Austin Healey's and Triumphs and Mercedes and all kinds of really neat sports cars. One of the attractions, Lauren Green, they called it the free act area at Riverside. You didn't, at that time, you didn't pay an admission fee to go to Riverside. It was all free. And you bought tickets to go on the rides. And one of the things that they did to bring people to the park was they got singing acts and popular TV stars to come out to the park to draw the people. This was Sylvia Hafke. She was a roller skating champion. Giacomo. This was after he won the Riverside 500. And this is Patnode, Big Ed Patnode. And you can see he was big, he towered over his car. And you can see exactly why you could hear the races in East Long Meadow, because the track was right here, and then there was the pits, and there was the river. And I've heard that people could hear as far up as Winchester Square, you could hear the races on Saturdays. This is Ed Carroll and Mike North. He was a Hollywood agent. He represented Lauren Green and Lassie and other people, and you can guess from his pants that this is probably from the 1970s.
Jack Carpet.
It's the entrance to Riverside Park, the Midway, the monorail, and here was Lassie. Lassie was a big draw. She was there in 1972, and I read that when she came out, she flew in a first-class seat. So she was a true movie star. This is the rollaway. And this is the way a lot of us remember Riverside Park, the old entrance next to the roller rink. Another shot of the rollaway. In 1979, the Ed Carroll Jr. Terminated the lease of the rollaway, and they tore down the old rollaway. So Susan and David Maiolo opened up the new rollaway down the street and across the street, and they operated it for about another 10 years. And this was the new rollaway. Ed Carroll Jr., who ran the park after his father passed away. In 1982, I believe, 83, the Cyclone roller coaster was built. It was modeled after the Coney Island Cyclone, and that is still a big attraction today. It was 1987. There was a huge fire. At this point, the administrative offices were in the old bowling alley building, and it caught on fire and it pretty much burned to the ground. And that's the carousel at Riverside Park is a 1909 Illions carousel. It was not original to the park. It was moved to the park in 1940. Ed Carroll traded 300 pairs of roller skates for it, and I think he got the better end of the deal on that one. This is it's eligible to be listed on the National Register. Park management hasn't really done anything with that, but it is eligible. And several of the horses on the carousel are unique to any Aliens carousel. In 1994, there was a proposal to bring a casino to Riverside Park. This was an artist rendering of the casino, and it was put on a non-binding referendum at the town, and the town soundly defeated. They didn't want any part of a casino at Riverside. In 1997, the Carroll family felt that they had brought Riverside Park as far as a family could. They realized they were in competition with huge corporations, and that they were not really in a position to do anything else with the park, and they ended up selling it to Premier Parks. And one of the first things Premier did was they built a new carousel building near the entrance of the park to put the carousel in. It opened up the next year as Riverside The Great Escape, with a new roller coaster. I believe it was the Mind Eraser. Elevator and Island Kingdom were other attractions that opened up. This is an aerial view from about 1997, I think. You can see the new carousel building up in the top center. The Speedway is still on the right. And this right here is the diving platform from Lake Takadip. You can see it's still there. Next improvement was the water park was expanded, and they built the bridge over Main Street to alleviate traffic problems. So the park, the Speedway. The Speedway last race was held in 1999. I think that from people I've talked to, race fans have never forgiven Six Flags for closing the Speedway. And the next year, in 2000, they built the Superman Ride of Steel ride in its place. And at that point, Riverside Park was rebranded as Six Flags New England. This is the park, early 2000s. You can see they bought a huge parcel on the west side of Main Street for parking and the park, and they are every year adding another roller coaster, new rides to keep the park fresh. And that is the end of my presentation. If anyone has any questions or wants to share a story, I'd be happy to see if I can answer.
Do they still have picnics in the Grove or anything like that? No?
Yes, they do. I don't think that they market it as much as they used to, but I think it's still, they still do.
Thank you, David. That was very well researched and terrific. We brought some books for sale. They're in the back there from Acadia Press, and we also have refreshments, so please avail yourself of them, and they'll even autograph your book if you want. So it's a rare chance to get an autographed edition. So thank you very much, and we're glad to have you here.
Yeah.